Our next witness is Dr Belinda Brooks-Gordon, who's a reader in psychology and social policy at Birkbeck College in London. Belle de Jour rather contradicted the perception that nearly all prostitutes were exploited, were victims, were trafficked, often by unscrupulous men and so on. And that perception has, to a great extent, driven legal policy, hasn't it? How true is this? And how much does it justify the criminalising of the men who use them, for instance?
It doesn't at all. It
doesn't at all what?
It doesn't justify it at all. The exploitation theory, it's authoritarian, it's doctrinaire, and it's not based on any scientific evidence. I'm quite shocked by some of the statistics that I've heard bandied about when they're not based on anything, and the theories and suggestions.
Well, the statistic that stuck in my mind was the previous witness saying something like 75% are drawn into prostitution in childhood, most vulnerable sections of society, driven by poverty and so on. Are you saying that isn't true?
I'm saying there's no scientific evidence to support that. We do know that there are children in prostitution. The state is not a particularly good parent. We know that they're also a tiny minority compared to the huge amount of women who are working of their own volition, both on street, and the vast majority are off street. That much we do know. The street population, according to all the health and harm reduction literature, is actually a tiny proportion. It's between 10 and 15% at most. The vast majority are off street, and they have nothing to gain by raising their head above the parapet because of the stigma and because of the criminalisation when it comes to lobbying and campaigning.
Can you very briefly just paint a picture of the typical prostitute then?
I can certainly tell you that the typical prostitute is off street. One particularly good study in Leeds by Tila Saunders showed that the majority are women who 48% of whom had either been in nursing or caring or had a university degree, and they were working off street. Their families didn't know they were working in sex work, and they had chosen to because of either for childcare or the fact that it was high returns for a short amount of time.
Matthew Taylor.
Well, this is powerful evidence. Can I just check one other thing? Do you also deny this often stated link between prostitution and drug abuse? So are you saying that that prostitutes are no more likely to have drug and addiction problems than other women?
Certainly no more likely than some other groups. For example, some people in entertainment industry, pop stars, what have you, and some people in city trading in very high-stress jobs with high-income earning groups. What I will say is that the link can be broken. They've done it in Switzerland. There is no need for the link to exist. If you provide injecting
can we just
clinics...
rewind this? It's slightly odd, this parallel that you're making. So what you're saying is that drug abuse amongst prostitutes is no higher than amongst the kind of tiny group of the kind of celebrities and the kind of hyper-rich. But in comparison to people in the same broad socio-economic category as themselves, but who are not prostitutes, are they more likely to have drug and addiction problems?
No, because the vast majority of prostitutes are off-street, sort of middle class, middle-age, mundane work, doing 2 or 3 days a week. They're not Belle de Jour, and they're not the sort of Amy Winehouse character on the street. They are in the middle off street. The mundanity of sex work is probably, I think, if we're looking at popular culture, was sort of epitomised in Band of Gold, those kind of women.
Do you think there's anything inherently strange about the idea of paying somebody to pretend to enjoy having sex with you? I mean, if you had a friend, if you had a friend of yours who was a man and who said, "Oh, I'll meet you down the pub at 9 o'clock, but I'm just going to go and see a prostitute before that," would that be like them saying they were going to Tesco's to buy beans?
Well, I think some people have a huge moral problem with large supermarkets and some of the things they get up to.
Fine. No, that's very cute, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, it helps that Terry Lee is listening.
I think people valorise.
No, but you've got to be fair, because I'm asking you a question about yourself, because I'm asking you whether you yourself feel, in a way, the attitudes that you're suggesting we should feel. So would you feel about a male friend of yours who went to prostitutes all the time, well, that's just absolutely, fine? Or would you actually think, it's a bit sad and desperate?
I don't see it as sad and desperate, because the variety of clients are enormous. They range from the young man with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy paying for the first non-medical touch in his life, to the widower who goes to the same sex worker year in, year out and develops a relationship with them. Women in 5-star hotels paying for a happy ending to a massage in a classy salon. So the variety is enormous. 25% of men who pay for sex pay other men for sex. So when you start criminalising the clients, one of the things
I'm not suggesting criminalising, but can we just relate this to a broader question of, do you feel that society's attitudes towards women broadly are fine? Do you think there's a problem about the objectification of women?
First of all, you have to define what you mean by objectification, because I think there's a difference between prostitution and selling sexual services.
The fact that the internet is kind of overwhelmingly full of pornography, for example, the kind of sexualisation of advertising, all that kind of stuff. Do you think that that as a society, our attitudes, or men's attitudes towards women and towards sex, are healthy?
According to the Sexual Attitude Survey, and that's the largest empirical survey we've got, the NatSal survey, that they look fairly healthy to me.
This is the moral maze. Do you think it's wrong?
No, I don't. I don't think there's any philosophical difference between commercial sex and any other kind of consenting sex that adults have, whether that is swinger sex, gay sex, unmarried sex. I don't see any moral difference.
Can we just look for a moment at expand that point or probe that point a little bit further? Is there any conception in your philosophy of some kind of things being socially disapproved of? I mean, for example, there are some things we can't do, like selling your organs or selling babies. Is sex in that category? Or if not, how do you distinguish it from that category?
I see sex, I distinguish sex because it's a service. And very often the things that people do in sex, people often think of the sex industry as just heterosexual, penetrative sex. It's not. People pay for all sorts of different things, to be beaten or to be, bathed and all sorts of different things. So I see it as a service, and very often the sex workers see it as a service. They don't see any moral equivalence between giving an enema to a client because they find that sexually charged, or when they were working as a nurse giving an enema, or a bed bath.
So really this comes down to a kind of individual autonomy. That's the principle, that people should be able to behave in any way they want to. But what about the point made by the previous witness then, that prostitution gives boys and men the feeling that they have a sexual entitlement over women? You reject that argument?
I do totally reject that argument. I'd go further and say that also, I mean, the previous speaker made a causal relationship between fuelling demand, and there is no evidence to say either that paying for sex fuels demand in any way. It's a very simple economic argument, and you could equally say that the government, by arguing that 50% of people should be in higher education, and these people are paying fees, and we know there is good empirical evidence to show that more students are going into sex work, indeed Belle de Jour herself was funding a PhD, that the government is fuelling supply.
But are you happy about that? I mean, surely you disapprove of it, from the way you describe it.
I'm saying that the assumptions drawn from it are wrong. The assumption that it is fuelling supply, that we're...
Yeah, but you're not... Are you happy about the situation where the government's requirements for payment for higher education and tuition fees, etc., are actually causing women to go into prostitution who wouldn't otherwise go?
Yes.
Is that okay with you?
I don't feel that the government should be charging tuition fees to answer that question. What those students then choose to do, they're making a decision, as Belle de Jour did.
And just lastly, given the evidence you say you've got, which contradicts the perception or the way the campaigners tend to put the state of prostitution in this country, what do you then make of all the attempts to currently quite successful attempts to criminalise the people men particularly,
Sadly,
who use
indeed,
prostitutes?
It's been highly successful. The Policing and Crime Act came into being last week.
So what do you make of that?
I think it's a dreadful law, a strict liability law. It contravenes fundamental tenets of our criminal law of fair warning and minimal criminalisation. It'll be a dreadful law, and it'll cause more immiseration and a downward spiral into the criminal justice system for women. It's argued that this law is supposed to shift the focus to men rather than women, and yet 3 out of 5 of the sections in this Act actually further criminalise women. You know, to remove the forced rehabilitation orders. They're Victorian. That's a Victorian morality that's being applied to force people into rehab. And as a psychologist, we know that forced rehabilitation doesn't work. People have to be motivated and want to change their behaviour. Also, with regard to...
I'm going to have to stop you there.
Oh, sorry.
I could listen to you forever, but unfortunately we haven't got the time. Dr Brooks Gordon, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.